like to first of all introduce our first speakers, who are going to give you an update on everything that's been JUNIPER have been doing since the last research meeting. And for those of you who haven't been to our last research meeting and don't quite know who we are, I think there'll be a quick introduction as to who the JUNIPER consortium are and what we're doing. So that's going to be Professor Julia Gog and Professor Matt Keeling are going to be doing the introduction. So they are the two principal investigators on JUNIPER and sort of founded JUNIPER and organising and leading all the work that they're doing. So both of them are members of the of SPI-M, so the Special Pandemic Influenza Group on Modelling, and they're both also members of SAGE and various other government organisations. So very well placed to lead the work that JUNIPER consortium is doing. So with that, I will pass over to Julia Gog, who I believe is going to start with the talk. So thank you very much, Julia.
Thanks, Kira. Thanks for the introduction. And David and the Newton Institute, thank you very much for your ongoing support and partnership in this to make sure we've connected up with the wider academic world. This is a crucial part of JUNIPER. Thank you. We're going to tag team this again, just to keep Matt and I on our toes. I'm going to hand straight over to Matt.
Thank you very much. Yeah, just to echo that, the huge thanks to David and everyone at the INI. So this is our sort of 3-month update from where we were at the first meeting. We're still a group of 7 universities, and we're going to go through and talk a little bit more about who's in which group and the work that we're doing, just to give you a flavour of things that have happened sort of in the last 3 months. Basically, we're the same people, but we just have more information to share. Julia.
We're just going to walk through each of the groups. First up is Bristol. You can see who they are there. We're going to hear more from Ellen and Hannah this morning. Key projects here are wastewater, which is, you'll hear an update on that one day, but it's another interesting way of tracking COVID. Long-term vaccination strategies, a lot of work on schools and actually in higher education from the Bristol group. And of course, very live is thinking about variants of concern, indeed, very, very topical today. But we'll be hearing more from Ellen and Hannah today.
So next up is Manchester. We have 3 co-Is and a team of postdocs. Manchester's been doing a lot of work looking at care homes. So Ian is part of the SAGE group on care homes. I think he chairs it now. There's also been a large amount of work looking at hospitalisation pathways, especially linking in with the Manchester Trusts. Thomas in particular has been doing a huge amount of work with ONS with their COVID infection survey, sort of trying to sort of bring the models into that and then work on understanding the impacts of waning immunity to see what's going to happen over the next 6, 9 months, 12 months.
Next up is Warwick, and you can see Matt there, but there's 3 co-Is at Warwick, Louise, Matt and Mike. Warwick's one of the larger groups as part of the consortium, the largest, but links in with lots of the other groups on lots of different topics. But some of the key projects here again is vaccination, recent high profile paper, thinking about optimal strategies, what's happening as we're relaxing NPIs, escape mutants, waning immunity. And very crucially, some of the really pivotal work underpinning decisions along the UK roadmap, so modelling what's happening and what could happen or what will happen under different situations in the future. Lots of work on testing in secondary schools and of course schools and universities, higher education as well. And we're going to hear more eventually on costs and benefits. Actually, no, we're going to hear more today from Mike on costs and benefits of the COVID-19 response, so bringing a different way of thinking about that into the mix.
So this is Lancaster, where the PIs are Chris Jewell and John Reed. So John has been heavily involved with the CocoNet study, which is trying to measure social contacts, so trying to actually understand the drivers of spread for the pandemic and how those have changed over time. They've also been heavily involved with questions about local spatial scale and how to model that. And in particular, really developing some absolutely cutting edge spatial statistics to try and estimate movement and transmission dynamics throughout the COVID outbreak.
Two groups in this slide. There's Exeter, a co-I is TJ McKinley, and member is Rob Challen, who we'll hear from later. And understanding new variant work is what we're going to hear about from Rob later, and from TJ brings expertise in uncertainty quantification in COVID-19. On the right, we've got the Oxford group, where Deirdre Hollingsworth is the co-I. Projects there are particularly thinking about waning immunity. They've been thinking about that ahead of the rest of us, and contact tracing and understanding the impacts of contact tracing and some of the trade-offs there.
So I think this is the final place. We're down to Cambridge, and Cambridge sort of has two groups, one based in the maths department and one based in the MRC biostatistical unit. Julia, you all know, but we've also have Petra, who's another co-I. And within the maths group, lots and lots of work on variants and vaccine escape. Huge amounts of work on understanding transmission within universities. Some very nice work done by Maria, harping back to things that were done for sort of flu many years ago. And also large amounts of work on spatial dynamics, bringing in the sort of BBC survey that they did. The biostatistical unit's got incredibly strong links with PHE, which is a huge benefit for everybody. Lots of work on nowcasting, so estimating sort of R through time. Lots of things on trends for the variants of concern. As you can tell, we're all working on variants of concern, and also we're looking at vaccine efficacy. So some very sort of interesting, very detailed work looking at the dynamics through time.
And indeed, that's all the groups. And just, you saw a slide like this about 3 months ago. Here's just a very brief update. So this is a recent SPI-M consensus. I think this was made public last week, but it dates from end of April. You can see in the coloured bars, there's 12 estimates going in there towards the SPI-M consensus. And 8 of those 12 have come from JUNIPER groups. And we're not telling you which is which. I did a very, very rough count of papers from January through to April this year. And very roughly, there's about 100 papers which not just internal to government or groups within government, but come from academic groups. And roughly 70 of those have come from JUNIPER. And this is a useful milestone. We've come from being spun up. You heard about our early stages 3 months ago. And now we're really contributing the bulk of what's going into SPI-M at the moment. And we are working with other groups outside of JUNIPER as well on SPI-M. So I say roughly, there's a few papers in there where it's JUNIPER plus other groups from outside group JUNIPER. So it's not a hard border, should we say.
So it falls to me to talk about the highlights, and it's very, very hard to pick out highlights from the last 3 months, but really thinking about what's gone through to both SPI-M and then on to SAGE. Roadmaps to relaxations have been key. So these are the things that are underpinning steps 3 and 4 and the opening up that we've sort of had step 3 today. So work on medium-term projections. So thinking about what's going to happen over the sort of 5 to 6 week timescale. Nowcasting is going on. So that's mainly things like estimating R, which we've already seen, and JUNIPER does a lot of work on that. Vaccine escape work, so mainly coming out of sort of Cambridge and Warwick, they're thinking about what does it mean to actually sort of the risk that we're going to get evolution towards vaccine escape. Huge amounts of work on schools, reopening and testing and linking into some of the work on higher education. So, you know, what's the impact of these younger adults returning to environments where they're mixing more. Spatial patterns, so there's an example in the top right there, sort of areas of concern, thinking about the dynamics at a very fine spatial scale and how things are changing. Lots of work on social care. Social care is obviously important. We know that care homes got hit very, very hard in the first 2 waves, and so we need to think about what this means going forwards. Vast amounts of work. I've been off for the last week and everyone else has been frantically thinking about variants of concern. so I've come back to a bit of a whirlwind, but you're going to hear from Rob and Ed, I think, on variants of concern later on this morning. Things about the 4 steps for the roadmaps, how sort of that got sort of put together was, again, part of JUNIPER was working on that, and mass gatherings, as shown in the top left there, thinking about what's the impact of allowing large groups of people to get together. It's short time, it's usually outside, but what difference does it make? Almost all of these involve multiple centres across JUNIPER. It's not one university leading one thing. It's a very much a big collaborative effort working across all the different universities.
Thanks. I'd very much echo that in our second 3 months. You know, we put this thing where there's lots of lines of expertise and communication between all the groups, and it's getting hard to say this university does this, this does that. There's expertise in these places, but projects are cutting across now, which is wonderful. Science communication is ongoing, as Marianne and Rachel from editors in the Plus magazine. And again, I'd underline how marvellous it is to have in-house science writing expertise within JUNIPER, so that they're seeing live what we're up to, what's interesting, what's important now, and they're able to disseminate it for a broader audience pretty immediately. So just to really shorten that time and that chain there. Some recent articles, Ours Not All You Need. I'll not talk about that, but have a look at that, that one's me. Keeping Up with COVID-19, that's Thomas House and some of the ONS survey work. Testing in schools, that's not a typo, it's investigating how well testing is working in schools. Big questions on vaccination, where do we stand, where are we going? And the $1 million, will the virus escape the vaccines? There's also a podcast series, if you want to listen to me wittering on for longer in conversation with Marianne and Rachel, there's a podcast there. And I think the next interview is going to be with Mike Tildersley from Warwick.
Yeah, so finally, just sort of thinking forwards, you know, what's going to be the next 3 months before we host one of these, well, before we have one of these sort of hosted for us again. So think about future highlights. I think waning immunity and the potential of vaccine escape is going to be very important. We really need to start planning for what's going to happen in the autumn, winter. Do we need booster vaccines? And I think that's really going to be a question of bringing the models and the data together. That feeds into longer term vaccination strategies about whether we're going to need boosters every winter. And if we do, which are the groups that we're going to target? How do we actually sort of make sure that this doesn't become a major problem in years to come? Variants of concern, not surprisingly, is hot on everyone's mind at the moment, and is going to be for some time. There's going to be a talk today by Rob and Ed that will sort of highlight some of the early work we've done, but this is going to be continuing. Spatial heterogeneity is going to be important, both in terms of trying to identify hotspots early, but also thinking about how we can mitigate against these and what sort of controls we can put in. And then finally, what we've been doing a lot of is, you know, reacting to emerging challenges. So variants of concern is a good example of this, but I'm sure there's going to be others as we move forward. And now we've got this team that really does work together and pulls together, where we can bring in expertise on a vast number of disciplines at quite short notice. I think we're in a really good position to start reacting to these in a way that can really help policy move forwards. Thank you.
Now I have to find the stop share button. If someone can stop my sharing, that'd be amazing. I've lost the
Thank you very much. Thanks, Matt and Julia. That was a great overview of all the amount of work that's been done, which I can't believe has only been in 3 months. So it's quite amazing. Unless anyone has any burning questions for Matt and Julia right now, if you do think of anything later, we have got a longer sort of panel discussion session later. So if you think of anything in the meantime that you want to ask Matt and Julia, feel free to put it in the quick Q&A and we can come back to it at the end of the session.